Hey everyone, and welcome back to Wellness Unpack, this show that takes a deep dive into the stuff that actually makes a difference in your life.
I like that.
So
Makes a
today,
difference. Yeah.
we're tackling something we all deal with,
Mm.
habits.
Yes.
Specifically, how the heck they work, and how we can use that knowledge to nail our goals, especially when it comes to fitness and wellness.
I love it.
I know.
It's so important.
You know, it's funny. We do all this stuff on autopilot every day, and most of us have no clue how our brains are actually pulling the strings.
You're so right.
It's true. I mean, I've been brushing my teeth this same way for years, but never really stopped to think why.
Yeah.
So today we're going to get into the nitty-gritty
Okay.
using these two sources you sent over.
Awesome.
One from Sunshine Bookseller about the science of habits, and another from Medium that zeroes in on using those principles to crush fitness goals.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And to help us make sense of it all, we got an expert in the
Oh,
house.
stop it.
Someone who eats, sleeps, and breathes habit formation and behavior change.
Well, I wouldn't say I dream about habits,
What?
but I am pretty obsessed with understanding how they work.
Fair enough. And that's exactly why you're here,
Glad to be here.
to break down the complex science into stuff we can actually use.
Love that.
So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and get ready for some serious aha moments.
All right, let's do it.
And before we get started, gotta mention something that can make this whole wellness journey a bit smoother and maybe even a little more fun.
Okay, I'm listening.
Megano Tonic.
Okay.
This isn't just another health drink. It's a delicious, powerful elixir designed to make weight loss fun and effortless.
Wow, I need that in my life.
You can buy it by visiting https://rebrand.leave Lee Body Tonic or clicking the link in the description of this podcast.
All right, I'm checking it out.
Okay, now let's dive into that Sunshine Bookseller article.
Yes, let's get into it.
They talk about this thing called the habit loop, and honestly, it's blowing my mind already.
Oh, yeah, the habit loop, it's foundational.
So is this like...
It's the cue,
Okay.
the routine, then the reward.
I see.
It's basically the engine behind all our habits,
Oh, wow.
good and bad.
Okay, so let's say you've had a crazy day at work, and all of a sudden you're elbow deep in a bag of chips, that familiar feeling.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling well.
Right.
The stress in that scenario is your cue.
Yeah, huh?
It triggers the routine, which is reaching for the chips, and then, boom, you get the reward. A temporary escape from the stress. But here's the thing.
Our brains are wired to chase that reward.
Yes, exactly.
And that actually reinforces the whole loop, so the next time you're stressed out of your mind.
The cycle repeats itself.
Oh, man.
It's like carving a path in the woods. The more you walk it, the easier it becomes to follow, even if it's leading you somewhere you don't really want to go.
That's such a good analogy.
Thanks.
So it's not just about knowing the habit loop exists, but also how to hack it to our advantage, right?
Absolutely. And that's where this whole idea of aligning your habits with your goals comes into play.
Oh, that makes sense.
If your habits are working for you, awesome.
Right.
But if they're pulling you in the opposite direction of where you want to be,
Yeah.
it's going to be an uphill battle.
So if your goal is to, let's say, run a marathon.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That Medium article had a great example of this. They talked about setting a specific goal, like being able to run for 30 minutes straight without stopping.
I could see that it's like a stepping stone.
Yeah.
But how do you actually turn that goal into consistent habits?
Well, you'd have to build a routine around it.
Okay.
Running a few times a week, gradually increasing your distance, maybe adding some strength training to avoid injuries. It's all about making those actions so automatic.
Wow.
We barely have to think about them.
So if we're trying to build new good habits and break those pesky bad ones, what are some proven ways to make it happen? That's the million-dollar question, right?
That's the question everyone wants answered.
Right.
Well, for starters, visualization is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just for athletes anymore.
I've heard about this.
It's about mentally rehearsing the steps of a new habit, almost like you're creating a mental movie.
So if I want to start meditating each morning, would I actually picture myself waking up, rolling out my mat, getting comfy, and focusing on my breath?
Exactly. The more vividly you can imagine it, the better. It's like giving your brain a blueprint to follow.
Wow. I'm starting to see how this could work.
Yeah, it's cool.
But is there a way to make these new habits stick? It's easy to get excited about something and then lose steam after a week.
Definitely. That Medium article had some solid advice for making fitness goals stick within a 30-day time frame.
Okay, what is it?
Start small. Focus on consistency and track your progress.
I like that.
Don't try to overhaul your whole life overnight. That's setting yourself up for failure.
Baby steps. It's like instead of trying to climb Mount Everest, you start by hiking a small hill.
Exactly. And don't forget the power of reward.
Ooh, tell me more.
When you achieve a small win, celebrate it. That taps into the reward part of the habit loop, reinforcing those positive feelings.
Oh, I love celebrating little wins.
Me too. It's so important.
But what about those bad habits that just won't quit? You know, the ones that sneak up on you like a ninja.
Those are the tricky ones. And there's a reason they're so hard to break. They've worn deep grooves in our brains.
Oh, no.
Making them feel almost impossible to resist.
So what's the solution? Pure willpower. Because honestly, that stuff only gets me so far.
Willpower is definitely a part of it, but there's a smarter way. We have to delve into the science of long-term depression now before you panic. This isn't about feeling sad or down.
Wait, depression? I thought we were talking about wellness.
I know it sounds a little weird, right? But in neuroscience, long-term depression refers to the weakening of connections in your brain related to those unwanted habits.
Oh, okay. So it's not about feeling depressed, but about intentionally dialing down the strength of those bad habit pathways.
Exactly. It's like slowly erasing a pencil mark on a piece of paper. It takes time and effort, but eventually those unwanted connections fade, making it less likely for those bad habits to resurface.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. So we can actually rewire our brains to make those bad habits less automatic.
Yes, exactly.
That's incredibly hopeful.
It is, and one of the best ways to do this is with something I call the replacement habit technique.
Ooh, what's that?
It's about disrupting the bad habits cycle by immediately swapping it with a good one.
So instead of beating yourself up for giving in to a craving, you're saying it's better to focus on doing something healthier right away.
Exactly. Let's say you're trying to cut back on mindless snacking. Every time you reach for that bag of chips, counter it with a few deep breaths or a quick walk around the block.
Brilliant. So you're basically redirecting that energy into something positive.
That's the idea.
And over time, that new association gets stronger.
Yes.
Eventually, the urge to snack might be replaced with the urge to take a deep breath or get moving.
Right.
It's like training your brain to choose a different path.
Love that.
Speaking of choosing paths, let's switch gears for a second and talk about a habit-building program that really caught my eye.
Okay, I'm interested.
It comes from Andrew Huberman, the neuroscience guru.
Oh, yeah, Huberman, he's great.
In one of his YouTube videos, he lays out this 21-day habit-building program that really resonated with me. It's super structured and strategic, almost like a foolproof way to make positive changes.
I'm intrigued.
So the program revolves around focusing on 4 to 5 new habits a day for 21 days.
Okay, that sounds intense.
But here's the catch. You don't beat yourself up for missing a day.
Oh, really?
It's about being consistent, not perfect.
That's refreshing. So many programs are all about that all or nothing mentality, which honestly sets most people up to fail.
Right. This approach is more realistic.
I actually like it.
It acknowledges that life happens. You're going to have days when you slip up, and that's perfectly fine.
And that self-compassion actually makes us more likely to stick with it in the long run.
It's like that saying, progress, not perfection. That's a mantra we should all live by.
Absolutely.
Especially on our wellness journeys. And hey, speaking of wellness journeys...
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Folks, remember Nagano tonic? We talked about it earlier. And for good reason, it's not your average health drink. It's designed to make weight loss fun and effortless with a blend of natural ingredients that actually tastes good.
Sign me up.
No more boring diets or weird tasting potions.
You
can buy it by visiting https://rebrand.lay-bodytonic or clicking the link in the description of this podcast.
Okay, I'm adding to cart now.
Now back to the Huberman program.
Yeah.
What were you saying about it being structured and strategic?
So one thing that really stood out to me was this idea of task bracketing. It sounds a little technical, but it's basically about using the power of a part of our brain called the basal ganglia, which is responsible for kicking off and stopping actions.
I see.
And according to Huberman, the key is to focus on the neural activity that happens right before and after a habit, creating a clear start and finish point.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like putting bookends on the habit.
Exactly.
And by consistently doing this,
yes,
we're training our brains to recognize and execute those actions more automatically.
It's pretty cool.
It makes sense when you think about it. Our brains love patterns and predictability.
So true.
So by establishing these boundaries, we're giving our brains the cues they need to lock in the habit.
I like to think of it as giving your brain a clear signal. All right, brain, this is where the habit starts, and this is where it ends, nice and clear.
That's a good way to put it. And the best part is that task bracketing can be applied to any habit, whether it's exercise, meditation, journaling, or even something as simple as making your bed every morning.
Right. It's super versatile.
Now I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. We've got the habit loop. The idea of task bracketing, the importance of visualizing the habit, and of course, remembering to celebrate those small wins.
It's all coming together.
It's like a multi-pronged attack on building better habits.
Absolutely. And it's all based on solid science, not just some trendy self-help gimmick.
Right, we're tapping into the power of neuroscience to create lasting change.
Which is really exciting.
And, that brings up another point. People often get tripped up thinking they have to be super specific about when they do a habit, like setting a rigid time in their calendar.
Oh, I've definitely fallen into that trap before.
That's so true. But didn't Huberman say it's not so much about the specific time, but more about the phase of the day and your brain's natural chemistry at that time?
Exactly. Our brains and bodies go through these ebbs and flows of energy and focus throughout the day by aligning our habits with those natural rhythms. We're working with our biology, not against it.
It's like understanding our own internal clock and using it to our advantage.
For example, Huberman suggests tackling those high-friction habits, the ones that require a lot of willpower and effort during the first 8 hours after waking up. That's when dopamine and norepinephrine levels are naturally higher.
So things like exercise or tackling a big work project would be best suited for those morning hours when we're naturally more alert and driven. Makes sense.
And then as those neurochemicals start to decline, we can switch to habits that require less mental heavy lifting, like journaling, reading, or getting creative.
I love how strategic and personalized this approach is. It's not about forcing ourselves into a one-size-fits-all routine.
And let's not forget about sleep. Huberman emphasizes that the third phase of the day, roughly 16 to 24 hours after waking up, is crucial for consolidating those neural connections we've been working so hard to build.
So important. It's like giving our brains time to absorb all that new learning and solidify those habits, which is why prioritizing sleep is so essential, right?
Absolutely. Creating a good sleep environment, limiting screen time before bed, and having a consistent sleep-wake routine are all critical for optimal brain function. And yes, habit formation.
Wow, it's amazing how everything is connected. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress management, habit formation. It's all part of one big ecosystem of well-being.
You got it.
This whole conversation is reminding me of when I was trying to get into a regular meditation practice. I was so focused on doing it at the right time every day that I completely missed the point.
Oh, I've been there. We can get so caught up in the details that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
But once I let go of that rigidity and found a time that felt natural and effortless, something magical happened.
What happened?
Meditation became a source of joy and peace instead of a chore.
That's awesome.
I know, right?
It's all about finding that flow.
Exactly. It's about creating a life that feels good on every level.
Love that.
And that brings us to another fascinating concept. Huberman talked about reward prediction error.
Ooh, now that one sounds interesting.
It sounds a little technical, but it's actually pretty intuitive. It's basically your brain's way of anticipating and responding to reward.
Oh, okay.
So like when we know we're going to get a tasty treat after a workout or a sense of accomplishment after finishing a tough task, our brains release dopamine, which keeps us motivated.
Right. And here's the kicker. The dopamine rush is often bigger when the reward is unexpected.
Really?
Like if you get a surprise bonus at work or a random compliment from a stranger, it can trigger an even bigger surge of dopamine.
That makes sense. It's like the element of surprise amplifies the pleasure.
Exactly. And we can actually use this knowledge to our advantage by consciously focusing on the positive feelings we get from a habit, both before, during, and after.
Okay.
We're basically priming our brains to anticipate that reward, making us more likely to stick with it.
So it's not just about the end goal.
Nope.
But about finding ways to enjoy the journey itself.
Precisely. It's about cultivating a mindset of appreciation and gratitude for those small wins along the way.
I love that it's like shifting from a place of I have to I get to.
Yes, such a powerful shift.
A small change in wording, but a big shift in mindset.
Couldn't agree more. And, it's also about recognizing that progress isn't always linear. There will be setbacks and challenges, and that's okay. It's all part of the learning process.
So embracing those imperfections is part of what makes the journey so much more interesting. And speaking of embracing the journey, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. We talked about the habit loop, the importance of alignment, how to build good habits, the power of visualization, and even that fascinating concept of reward prediction error.
We did.
And next time,
Yeah.
We'll dive into the nitty-gritty of breaking those bad habits because, let's be honest, we all have them.
Oh, yes. Can't wait to tackle those.
But for now, let's leave our listeners with a thought to chew on. What's one small habit you could start today that would have the biggest positive impact on your life? Think about it, and we'll pick up the conversation next time on Wellness Unpacked.
Great question. I'm going to think about that one myself. Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deeper into those automatic behaviors that shape so much of our lives.
My brain is still buzzing from our last conversation.
Mine too.
It's like we've been given the secret toolkit for self-improvement.
And the best part is it's all grounded in science. We're not just talking about fluffy self-help stuff here. We're talking about harnessing the power of neuroscience to make real, lasting changes.
Okay, so let's get back to breaking those bad habits, those pesky little gremlins.
Yes.
That can sabotage our best intentions.
We all have them, whether it's procrastination, unhealthy eating habits, or that irresistible urge to scroll through social media for hours on end.
Oh, it's so frustrating.
I know, right?
Like you know what you should be doing, but you just can't seem to break free from those ingrained patterns.
And there's a reason for that. Those bad habits have become deeply entrenched in our neural pathways, making them feel automatic and almost irresistible.
So how do we fight back? Is it a losing battle?
Not at all. While breaking deeply ingrained patterns can be challenging, there are effective strategies based on neuroscience that can help us regain control.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the secret weapon?
One of the most powerful tools is understanding the concept of long-term depression. And no, this isn't the kind of depression that involves feelings of sadness or low mood.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that one. It sounds a bit counterintuitive.
I know the term can be confusing, but in neuroscience, long-term depression refers to the weakening of synaptic connections in the brain. It's essentially the opposite of long-term potentiation, which is what strengthens those connections and makes habits more automatic.
Okay, so it's not about feeling depressed, but about intentionally weakening those neural pathways associated with the bad habit.
Exactly. Imagine you have a well-worn path in the woods. The more you walk it, the deeper and more defined it becomes. Long-term depression is like choosing to walk a different path over time. That old path becomes overgrown and less noticeable, making it less likely you'll accidentally wander down it.
That's a great analogy. So how do we actually induce this long-term depression? Is it all about willpower?
Willpower definitely plays a role, but relying solely on it can be exhausting and unsustainable. It's about working smarter, not harder, and one of the most effective strategies is to focus on disrupting the neural loop of the bad habit.
So interrupting that cue routine reward cycle we talked about earlier.
Precisely. And one way to do this is by introducing a replacement habit immediately after you slip up. It's about creating a new association in the brain.
So instead of beating yourself up for giving in to a craving, you're saying it's better to focus on immediately doing something healthier.
Exactly. Let's say you're trying to break the habit of mindlessly scrolling through social media every time you pick up your phone. Instead of dwelling on the slip-up, immediately put your phone down and engage in a different activity, like reading a book, listening to a podcast, or going for a walk.
It's like redirecting that energy into something positive and productive.
Exactly. And the more consistently you do this, the stronger that new association becomes. Eventually, your brain will start to link the urge to scroll with the positive replacement habit.
It's like rewiring the circuitry. Fascinating. And this technique can be applied to any bad habit, right?
Absolutely. It's all about identifying your triggers and having a plan in place to disrupt the automatic response.
Like creating a mental detour sign, redirecting traffic away from the old worn-out path.
Love that analogy. And the beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require superhuman willpower. It's about creating a system that supports your efforts.
You know, I've been trying to break the habit of hitting the snooze button every morning. It's a small thing.
Ugh, I know that one.
But it always sets me up for a rushed and stressful start to the day.
It's so hard to resist that snooze button.
So I'm trying to implement this replacement habit technique. Instead of hitting snooze, I'm making myself get up and do 10 jumping jacks.
Oh, wow.
It's silly, but it works. It gets my blood flowing and breaks the cycle of procrastination.
That's fantastic. It's a perfect example of how even small changes can have a big impact. It's about finding what works for you and being consistent with it.
You know, one thing that struck me about Huberman's program is that he doesn't advocate for making up for missed days at first. That sounded counterintuitive, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
It does. It's about breaking free from that perfectionist mindset that can often sabotage our efforts. It's acknowledging that slip-ups are inevitable, and instead of letting them derail us, we simply get back on track.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be human. We don't have to be robots to be successful with habit formation.
Exactly. And that self-compassion actually makes us more likely to stick with it in the long run. It's about building a sustainable system, not setting ourselves up for failure.
It's like that saying, progress, not perfection. It's a mantra we should all embrace, especially on our wellness journeys, speaking of which.
Oh, you're thinking about Nakano-tonic again, aren't you?
Maybe just a little. It's hard not to when we're talking about making wellness enjoyable, folks. I'm telling you, this stuff is a game changer. It's a delicious, powerful elixir designed to make weight loss fun and effortless. No more restrictive diets or tasteless potions, just pure enjoyment and results. You can buy it by visiting https://rebrand.lia.lia Body Tonic or clicking the link in the description of this podcast.
I'm intrigued. I might have to try that myself. Okay, back to our deep dive. One thing I found particularly intriguing in the Huberman transcript was his concept of task bracketing. It sounds like a powerful technique for solidifying those new habits.
It is all about leveraging the power of our basal ganglia, the brain region responsible for action, execution, and suppression.
And according to Huberman, the key is to focus on the neural activity that happens right before we initiate a habit and right after we terminate it. It's about creating a clear start and finish point for the behavior.
It's like putting bookends on the habit, creating a distinct container for it.
Exactly. And by consistently bracketing the habit in this way, we're training our brains to recognize and execute it more automatically.
It makes sense when you think about it. Our brains love patterns and predictability. So by establishing these clear boundaries, we're giving our brains the cues they need to make the habit stick.
And the beauty of task bracketing is that it can be applied to any habit, whether it's exercise, meditation, journaling, or even something as simple as making your bed every morning.
I'm starting to see how all of this fits together.
Yeah.
We've got the habit loop, task bracketing, visualization, replacement habits, and the importance of consistency and self-compassion. It's like a multifaceted approach to habit formation.
It is, and the best part is that it's all grounded in science. We're not just relying on anecdotal evidence or trendy self-help techniques. We're tapping into the power of neuroscience to create lasting change.
You know, one thing that often trips people up when it comes to habit formation is this idea that we have to be super specific about when we do the habit, like setting a rigid time on our calendars.
Right. But Huberman actually challenges that notion. He argues that it's not so much about the specific time, but rather about the phase of the day and the corresponding neurochemical state.
Because our brains and bodies naturally go through these ebbs and flows of energy and focus throughout the day.
Exactly. And by aligning our habits with those natural rhythms, we're working with our biology instead of against it.
It's about understanding our own internal clock and using it to our advantage.
For example, Huberman suggests tackling those high-friction habits, the ones that require a lot of willpower and effort during the first 8 hours after waking when levels of dopamine and norepinephrine are naturally elevated.
So things like exercise or tackling a challenging work project would be best suited for that morning phase when we're naturally more alert and driven.
Exactly. And then as those levels start to decline, we can shift to habits that require less cognitive effort, like journaling reading or practicing a creative skill.
I love how strategic and personalized this approach is. It's not about forcing ourselves into a one-size-fits-all routine.
And let's not forget the importance of sleep. Huberman emphasizes that phase 3 of the day, roughly 16 to 24 hours after waking, is crucial for consolidating those neural connections we've been working so hard to build.
It's like giving our brains the time and space they need to integrate all that new learning and make those habits stick.
And that's why prioritizing sleep hygiene is non-negotiable. Creating a conducive sleep environment, limiting screen time before bed, and establishing a consistent sleep-wake routine all contribute to optimal brain function and habit formation.
It's all connected, isn't it? Sleep, nutrition, exercise, stress management, habit formation. It's a holistic ecosystem of well-being.
Absolutely, and when we neglect one area, it inevitably impacts the others.
You know, this deep dive is reminding me of a time when I was trying to establish a regular meditation practice. I was so focused on doing it at the right time every day that I completely missed the point. I was creating unnecessary pressure and resistance.
It happens to the best of us. It's easy to get caught up in the minutia and lose sight of the bigger picture.
But once I let go of that rigidity and simply focused on finding a time that felt natural and effortless, something magical happened. Meditation became a source of joy and peace instead of chore.
That's the sweet spot, isn't it? When we align our habits with our values and our natural rhythms, it becomes less about willpower and more about flow.
Absolutely. It's about creating a life that feels good on every level. And that brings us to another powerful concept from the Huberman transcript, reward prediction error. Sounds a bit technical, but it's actually quite intuitive.
It is. It's essentially the brain's way of anticipating and responding to reward.
So like when we know we're going to get a delicious treat after a workout or a sense of accomplishment after finishing a challenging task, our brains release dopamine, which motivates us to keep going.
And what's interesting is that the dopamine release is often greater when the reward is unexpected. So like if you get a surprise bonus at work or a spontaneous compliment from a stranger, it can trigger an even bigger surge of dopamine.
That makes sense. It's like the element of surprise amplifies the pleasure and motivation.
Exactly. And we can actually leverage this knowledge to enhance our habit formation efforts by consciously focusing on the positive feelings associated with a habit, both before, during, and after. We're essentially priming our brains to anticipate that reward and make it more likely that we'll stick with it.
So it's not just about the end goal, but about finding ways to make the journey itself enjoyable and rewarding.
Precisely. It's about cultivating a mindset of appreciation and gratitude for the small wins along the way.
I love that it's like shifting from a place of to get to a subtle but powerful change in perspective.
And you know what? It's also about recognizing that progress isn't always linear. There will be setbacks and challenges along the way, and that's okay. It's all part of the learning process.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in embracing the imperfections. It's what makes us human, and it's what makes the journey so much more interesting.
Couldn't agree more. And hey, speaking of embracing the journey...
You're going to suggest we take a little Naginotonic break, aren't you?
It's hard to resist when we're talking about making healthy choices enjoyable.
You know me too well for our listeners who are just joining us. Naginotonic is a delicious and effective elixir designed to make weight loss fun and effortless. It's the perfect companion for those who are committed to creating a healthier and happier lifestyle. You can buy it by visiting https://rebrand.leela or clicking the link in the description of this podcast.
Now that's what I call a recipe for success.
All right, now that we've had our virtual Naginotonic break, let's shift our focus to something that can be equally challenging, breaking bad habits.
Ah, yes. Those pesky little gremlins that can sabotage our best intentions.
We've all been there, whether it's procrastination, unhealthy eating habits, or excessive screen time. Those bad habits can feel like they have a mind of their own.
It can be so frustrating. It's like we know what we should do, but we just can't seem to break free from those ingrained patterns.
And there's a reason for that. Those bad habits have often become deeply entrenched in our neural pathways, making them feel automatic and almost irresistible.
So how do we fight back? Is it a losing battle?
Not at all. While it can be challenging to break those deeply ingrained patterns, there are effective strategies based on neuroscience that can help us regain control.
Okay, I'm ready to hear them. What's the secret weapon?
One of the most powerful tools is understanding the concept of long-term depression. And no, this isn't the kind of depression that involves feelings of sadness or low mood.
Hold on, you're going to have to explain that one. It sounds a bit counterintuitive.
I know. But in the world of neuroscience, long-term depression refers to the weakening of synaptic connections in the brain. It's essentially the opposite of long-term potentiation, which is what strengthens those connections and makes habits more automatic.
Okay, so it's not about feeling depressed, but about intentionally reducing the strength of those bad habit pathways.
Exactly. It's like gradually dimming the lights on a stage. The less those pathways are activated, the weaker they become, and the less likely they are to trigger the unwanted behavior.
I'm starting to see a glimmer of hope here, so we can actually rewire our brains to make those bad habits less automatic.
Absolutely. And one of the most effective strategies is what I call the replacement habit technique. It's about disrupting the neural loop of a bad habit by immediately following a slip-up with a positive habit.
So instead of beating yourself up for giving in to that craving, you're saying it's better to focus on immediately engaging in a healthier alternative.
Precisely. Let's say you're trying to break the habit of mindlessly snacking. Every time you catch yourself reaching for that bag of chips, counter it by taking a few deep breaths or going for a quick walk.
That's brilliant. It's like redirecting the energy of the bad habit into something positive.
And the more consistently you do this, the stronger the new association becomes in your brain. Eventually, the urge to snack will be replaced by the urge to take those deep breaths or get moving.
It's like training your brain to choose a different path, and it makes so much sense. So let's brainstorm a few more examples. What about procrastination? What could be a good replacement habit for that?
Instead of scrolling through social media when you're feeling overwhelmed, set a timer for 15 minutes and commit to working on the task at hand. Even if you don't feel like it, starting is often the hardest part.
That's so true. Once you get going, the momentum often takes over. What about phone addiction? That's a big one for many people.
Every time you catch yourself mindlessly scrolling, Put your phone on airplane mode for 30 minutes and engage in a conversation with a loved one. Read a book or do something that nourishes your mind and soul.
I love those suggestions. It's about consciously choosing to disconnect from the digital world and reconnect with ourselves and the people around us.
Exactly. And remember, these are just examples. The key is to find replacement habits that resonate with you and your goals.
It's about personalizing the approach, which brings us to an important point. I want to invite all of you listening to take a moment to reflect on your own bad habits. Which ones are you ready to tackle, and what positive habits can you use as replacements? Take a minute to jot down some ideas. It's the first step towards making lasting change.
And don't be afraid to experiment. It's all about finding what works best for you.
I couldn't agree more. Now let's dive into a specific habit-building program that caught my eye. It comes from the brilliant mind of Andrew Huberman, and it's all about optimizing our daily routines for success.
I'm familiar with his work. He's a wealth of knowledge on neuroscience and human behavior.
He is. And in one of his YouTube video transcripts, he outlines a 21-day habit-building program that really resonated with me. It's structured and strategic, and it seems like a foolproof way to solidify those positive changes we're talking about.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, the program revolves around focusing on 4 to 5 new habits per day for 21 days. But here's the catch. You don't try to make up for missed days. It's all about building consistency without the pressure of perfection.
That's a refreshing approach.
Yeah.
So often we get bogged down by the all-or-nothing mentality, which can lead to discouragement and ultimately giving up on our goals.
Exactly. This program acknowledges that life happens. There will be days when we snip up or fall short, and that's okay. The key is to keep moving forward without getting caught in the trap of self-criticism.
What's fascinating about this approach is that it's not just about building individual habits. It's about building the meta-habit of doing habits itself. It's about cultivating a mindset of consistency and self-discipline.
That's a powerful distinction.
Yeah.
So it's like creating a positive feedback loop. The more we practice doing habits, the easier it becomes to adopt new ones and stick with them.
Precisely. And that's where the real transformation happens. It's not about fleeting bursts of motivation. It's about creating lasting change through consistent effort.
I'm inspired to give this program a try. I've got a few habits I've been wanting to incorporate into my daily routine for a while now, and this seems like the perfect framework to make it happen.
And I encourage you to do the same. Pick a few habits you've been wanting to start and use this 21-day program as a springboard. Embrace the challenge experiment and see what positive changes you can create in your life.
Absolutely. And speaking of positive changes,
You're going to remind us about Nagano tonic one more time, aren't you?
guilty as charged. It's just so darn delicious and effective. It's like the perfect sidekick for your wellness journey. Boost your energy, curb those cravings, and make weight loss a breeze with this incredible elixir. You can buy it by visiting https://rebrand.li/bodytonic or clicking the link in the description of this podcast.
Now that's what I call a recipe for success. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into habits and goal achievement. We've explored the science, the strategies, and the psychology behind those automatic behaviors that shape so much of our lives. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a powerful thought to ponder. What one small habit could you start today that would have the biggest positive impact on your life? Think about it and start building that brighter future one step at a time. Thanks for joining us on Wellness Unpacked.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Until next time.